Coming at you from my incredibly untidy loft, it's another edition of Indicator Plants of BC. Today, group number 5, calling this the Mapleish group. Why is it the Mapleish group? It is because every single one of these plants, like look at a maple leaf here, look how it's poking out like this. Every single one of these plants is vaguely palmately shaped leaves, or it just looks kind of mapley in general. So what do we have this week? Ooh, we have a grab bag this week. We have one actual maple, the horrible Oplopanax. We have does this look like a horse's foot to you? We have a little thing with tiny little plants on top of it. We have some rubuses or rubusii or whatever the plural of that might be, maybe just rubus. And then we have a couple bushes that produce these little round berries. But to start us off, we have an actual maple. We have our vine maple here, Acer circinatum. Acer is the genus to which all maples belong, so any proud Canadian wants to be familiar with their Acers. Not just a second-rate technology company, also a genus. Circinatum, that refers to the fact that the leaves of this plant tend to be kind of roundish looking, so that's where that comes from. And vine maple, this is another one of those kind of big shrubs, small trees that we get. You find this in the understory, lots of really kind of damp, well-developed forests. And so here is what vine maple often looks like when you walk onto a site that has lots of it. So vine maple will grow multiple stems from kind of underground here. And the stems will often be kind of leaning over like this. And when I was a kid growing up around Vancouver, I used to love my vine maples because the way that they tend to lean over like this, you can climb up them and hang off of them, and the trunks tend to be really kind of small and like good to hang on with your hands. So a pretty fun tree in that regard. Something else you can see here, a lot of maples tend to be really friendly towards epiphytes, and so those are little plants that grow on top of other plants, and you can see lots of epiphytic mosses and things growing on these maples right here. So taking a closer look at those leaves now, as I mentioned before, circinatum refers to its vaguely circular shape. It is quite round looking. As promised, it is palmate, so you can see how all of these little lobes in the leaf extend out and all the veins extend out from a central point. And then this will have, 7 to 9 lobes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's what those are right there. Also serrated around the edges. So I've got the serrate margins of the leaves. Like any good maple, this puppy is deciduous, so it will lose its leaves in the winter, regrow them every single spring. Getting a closer look in at the flowers now, it's got actually these they're hard to see, they're very small. So just for size reference, one of these leaves is about the size of like the top of a jar of peanut butter, that kind of area. You can see how big these flowers are relative to a bee. They're really small little things, but they're really cool looking. They've got these red sepals going around the outside. They've got these white petals on the inside here. Just really neat little flowers. Those, once they are pollinated, those will develop into a really unique fruit. Now, this is the bomb-proof way to identify any tree as being a maple. Maples all have this really distinctive type of fruit called a winged samara. So what is that thing? The winged samara has the seeds located in these little capsules here, and then it's got these huge wings coming off the outside like that. And basically they fall off of trees and they get carried by the wind. They kind of helicopter around, these little whirligigs that you see them flying and spinning around in the air. They're really cool looking. And you can differentiate different types of maples samaras by just the way that oftentimes the size and the angle between these two wings here. But this is the one for the vine maple right there. Next up, The horrible Oplopanax, Oplopanax horridus, otherwise known as our Devil's Club. Now, what does this name suggest to you? Well, the name Devil's Club and, horridus right there in the scientific name tells you that this is a pretty scary plant. And that is because it has all these spikes kind of all over the place on it. It is one of the prickliest plants in the forest. And when you come across a thicket of this, you are in bad luck. Some folks have nasty allergic reactions when they get pricked by Devil's Club. But yeah, so kind of a nasty plant there. Another reason it could be called Devil's Club is because for a lot of coastal First Nations groups in BC, it's actually a really important plant for ceremonial purposes. And so different groups, have different practices, but I believe for the Squamish First Nation, it could be used, is thought to be a portal to the spirit world. And so what you could do with this is you could burn it and you produce charcoal and mix the charcoal with some bear grease to create face paint that would be used in ceremonies. Could also use that actually for ink to make tattoos and things like that. And possibly one of the reasons why this was, such a spiritually important plant and ceremonially important plant is because it's actually been shown to be really medicinally powerful. And so you can use Devil's Club for anything, to treat anything from diabetes to tuberculosis to arthritis. Really medicinally strong plant, but really nasty when you just encounter it in a hike. Where you find these things, it has a really, really wet soil moisture regime. You find it in really damp places. Likes the rich soils too. And just a close up on some of those really nasty thorns. These things are on every surface of the Devil's Club. Underneath the leaves, up and down the stems, along the smaller stems like that. And yeah, really, you don't want to get pricked. Getting a closer look at some of those leaves. So it's got a very mapley looking shape of the leaf. That really distinct palmate shape. This is a very hairy leaf. You can kind of see that a little bit closer in this photo to the right here, but there's fuzz all over the place. And then size-wise, it's hard to mistake this plant for really anything else. These leaves tend to be like ultimate frisbee size to maybe even small garbage can lid. These leaves are quite large when you find this plant in the forest. Also kind of serrated around the edges. You can sort of see that in this left-hand photo there. And the reproductive structures of this plant, it produces a terminal inflorescence, another one of those big clumps of flowers that occur on the tippy top of the plant there. You can see all the bees going out on this one here. And so all of these flowers will go to produce these little tiny red berries. These are not edible for people. Apparently bears love them though, so good for you, bears. Alrighty, next up we have does this look like a horse's foot to you? The palmate coltsfoot, Petasites palmatus. So Petasites, what that genus name refers to, apparently a pedatus is like a fancy hat in Greece. This is a pedatus right here. And so, whoever was looking at their coltsfoots, they're like, you know what that makes me think of? Greek hats. There you go. Yeah, it's this funny little plant. Grows quite close to the ground, produces these quite large leaves that we'll get a closer look at in a minute, and then these rising stalks with clusters of white to pink flowers. It's a pretty distinctive thing when you find in the wild. So let's go get a closer look. First of all, we want to say what we're not talking about. We are not just talking about coltsfoot. Coltsfoot is this thing here. Looks really different from palmate coltsfoot. Why is it called coltsfoot? Well, this is a colt, small horse, and here's its foot. And look at the shape of that hoof on the bottom there, and look at the shape of this leaf right here. Pretty similar, right? So why do we associate palmate coltsfoot with coltsfoot? Here is why we associate palmate coltsfoot with coltsfoot. So imagine that you take this leaf and you give it to like a 5-year-old child, and you give them a set of like construction paper scissors, and you say, make this a hand for me. Well, they're going to take that leaf and they're going to cut out all these fingers, and they're going to produce this shape. So look at this and then take out all these little spaces, and it's the same basic shape, that same basic hoof shape, but you've cut all these fingers in it. That is why it is palmate coltsfoot. This leaf is, when you find this, it's, sometimes they have, not quite as deep gaps between the different lobes here. Sometimes it's a little bit shallower, but, usually kind of about this shape, and you can see these really distinctive palmate lobes developed there. And this is about the size of like a dinner plate when you go out and you find it in the wild. And having a look at the flowers now. So palmate coltsfoot, this is in family Asteraceae. That is also the family that includes your sunflowers, your dandelions, and the asters produce this really distinctive type of flower called a head inflorescence. We already saw one head inflorescence in this course. Here's another one. And so what that means is that each one of these, it looks like a single flower, but it's actually this really tight cluster of all kinds of little tiny flowers in the middle there. And you've got your disc flowers in the middle, and then you've got your ray flowers around the outside that produce these big petals here. Now, the palmate coltsfoot, its flower, it's actually really cool because it's got, each one of these is the teeny tiny little flowers. So that's an inflorescence or a compound flower. But then all of these are kind of aggregated together, and it's almost like an inflorescence squared. It's got like this big compound flower structure on top with little compound flowers inside of it. It's just compound flowerception, crazy stuff. Next up, our rubuses, or whatever the plural of rubus may actually be. Rubuses, these are the berry. This is the genus that includes things like our blackberries and our raspberries. We love our rubuses because they are always so delicious. And the first one that we are going to be talking about today is our thimbleberry, Rubus parviflorus. Parviflorus, parva in Latin means small. Florus means flower, so you've got your small flowered rubus, basically. Whenever I see the flowers, they don't look that small to me. It's just kind of a confusing name, but there you go. You see parvi appear in a few other names too, and so it's good to know. Yeah, Rubus thimbleberry forms these big thickets. You see it a lot in Pacific Spirit Park actually. And we love it when it forms these big thickets because it produces these really delicate little delicious berries. They are so good. There's an example of one of the berries there. Now they're really hard to collect because compared to like a raspberry or a blackberry, they tend to be really soft. But they are so delicious that you just have to kind of go out into the field and enjoy them right there. Getting a closer look at some of those leaves as well as the flower now. Now the leaves are this is how we're going to tell this plant apart from pretty much all the other rubuses. Nothing else produces a big palmate leaf like this. Just for point of reference, this leaf ranges from about the size of, like a little plate that your grandma would serve her teacup on to like a big dinner plate. That's about the size range for this leaf here. And it's that really distinctive palmate kind of mapley shape. Serrated around the edges, it tends to be a really fuzzy leaf as well, and always produces kind of these 5 distinctive lobes there. So kind of, yeah, like these big palmate fuzzy leaves, kind of a friendly plant. Getting into the berries now, look at these delicious little things. So the berries are this is actually a type of kind of compound fruit. So each one of these little cells contains the little seed, And so together, there's a lot of seeds and a lot of separate little fruits contained in this guy. Yeah, they tend to be really delicious though, super soft. You pluck them off and they just start falling apart in your hand right away. But it's called thimbleberry. Here is a thimble for points of comparison. Obviously, so thimbly. Next up, our next rubus is a five-leaved bramble, Rubus pedatus. Yeah, so this is kind of a funny little plant. It's a really small, delicate, beautiful little plant, and it really, like, you can get a sense from this photo on the left. It produces these really teeny tiny little leaves. Look at how big those things are. They're about as big as maybe the tips of two of your thumbs put together. And they form these big mats all over the ground by spreading from these stolons, these runners that grow along the ground. So this is a stem that grow laterally along the ground, and then you get separate little five-leaf brambles growing up off of that. So let's have a really close look at the leaves of the five-leaved bramble. This is one where the name really describes what you're looking at. 5 leaves. Here's one little leaflet, 2 leaflets, 3, 4, 5 right there. But there's actually some more interesting things going on here. So the scientific name pedatus, what that refers to is that this is actually something called a pedate leaf. And what the heck does that mean? Well, we've had our palmate leaves. Those are the ones that look like your hands. A pedate leaf, it's supposed to look like a foot. That's what pedate means. It doesn't really do that for me, but what it describes is this shape where you have the separate little leaflets coming out from a point in the middle, so like a palmate, but the ones on the sides here, notice how it comes out, and then from one stem it branches off into 2. And the other side, it's the same way. The stem comes out and then it branches off into 2 parts. And so that's the pedate shape. It looks like it's palmate. Technically, if we're getting super botanical, it's pedate though. Cool stuff. And here are some of the reproductive structures. Yeah, so they right on top of those leaves there, they produce these single beautiful little flowers. All of the rubuses are in family Rosaceae, and so that's the rose family. And the Rosaceae are really notable. They've got really distinctive flowers that have lots of teeny tiny little stamens in them, and then they've always got 5 petals, I believe, as well. So really typical kind of Rosaceae flower right there. Getting really botanical. Over to the right here, you can see that the berries are vaguely that same sort of rubus shape, like your vague blackberry, raspberry type shape, where you've got those little globular clusters of fruits there, little compound fruit. Now these ones, they produce kind of these big blobs, and there's not nearly as many of them as on some of the other rubuses, like your thimbleberry that we just looked at. So the fruits of this one, they're not quite as exciting as some of the others. They're still pretty good though. Just hard to, it's hard to find like a lot of them if you are really looking for a berry snack. Finally, we are on to some of our little round berries. So we have our black gooseberry first of all, Ribes lacustre, not Rubus. We are on to Ribes, the gooseberry genus now. So Ribes lacustre, another thing about this name, lacustre means grows next to lakes or ponds. And so, yeah, you can see in the soil moisture, this will tolerate some really wet habitats, some of those good kind of, some of those good habitats that are like right next to bodies of water. Loves the rich soils as well. And having a closer look at some of these leaves, it's got some pretty distinctive leaves here. That's actually a really cool looking leaf. And so it's got that vague palmate shape still. You've got kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 5 or 6 lobes there. And those are broken off into sort of these They've got these big serrations kind of coming out of each lobe as well, quite deeply indented or sinused around each one of those lobes. Really kind of neat looking. These are going to be deciduous, so get to the autumn season and those leaves will turn red and fall off. And yeah, really just kind of a beautiful little plant. But one thing about our black gooseberry you got to watch out for is it does tend to be very, very spiky. When a plant has lots of thorns or spines or whatever on it, we say that it's armed. So your devil's club, super well armed. Black gooseberry, very well armed as well. And looking at the flowers now, holy smokes, that is a strange looking flower. The flowers tend to be kind of these, that's almost like this, you take a cup or a little bell and then you flatten it right out. And you get sort of this weird fleshy looking thing there. You can see a few stamens poking out in the middle there, a little stigma poking out in the middle there. And then all the petals and sepals appear to be fused into kind of one big piece, and it's sort of this white-pink mess. Kind of like this weird little alien flower that grows on it. Really distinctive looking. And finally, here's some of those fruits. So the gooseberries, I haven't had too many gooseberries myself, but people make a lot of jams and things like that out of them. It's supposed to be pretty delicious. And of course, as the name suggests, they are black. Next up, our Highbush cranberry, Viburnum edule. So one thing to note, Highbush cranberry is not a true cranberry. If we're going to get really botanical and kind of taxonomic for a minute there, cranberries are in the genus Vaccinium, which is the same genus that includes things like our blueberries and our huckleberries. Yeah, Highbush cranberry, Viburnum, it's like a slightly different thing. So getting a close look at the leaves now. The leaves, they look really similar to the vine maple that we were just looking at, don't they? They're the same kind of round shape. They've also got, they've got those little serrations going around them as well. The vine maple, however, it had 7 to 9 lobes though. This one's really distinctive. It's only got 1, 2, 3 lobes on it. And once again, this is another deciduous plant. So you can see how the leaves in this photo here, they turn red, they fall off come the autumn. What doesn't fall off, however, are some of the berries. So one really neat thing about this plant, the berries will persist over winter. And so this is a really important food source for animals, different types of wildlife, birds, as well as folks that are just living off the land. Gotta love their Highbush cranberry. Yeah, the berries are these small little things. They tend to grow in these little clusters here, and they develop out of these little tiny clumps of white flowers like that there. So a really neat really neat plant. Good winter food source. Here we are. Finally, the plant with the little plants on top of it. Youth on age. Tolmiea menziesii. Now, we talked about, we've had another menziesii already. Remember, it's named after the botanist Archibald Menzies. Really cool guy in the history of North American botany. So youth on age, super cool little plant. Why is it called youth on age? Why did I give it this stupid name? Well, it's because it has this tendency to grow vegetatively really tiny little copies of itself on top of itself. And so it produces these little clones that form on top of itself. Really neat little plant like that. It's just this really tiny little thing that you kind of find right on the ground, this little herbaceous plant. See kind of next to trails and stuff like that there. If you're on the UBC campus, you can go down to Tower Beach and find lots of it growing on kind of the disturbed hill slopes there. Really neat little plant. So here's a photo of what I mean when I'm talking about these little vegetative copies growing out of it. So these will grow. So this is a tiny little plant that is being incubated, and it's growing up, and eventually it will kind of sprout off and become its own thing. And why do plants grow vegetatively like this? Well, one thing is that their mother, their kind of host plant that's trying to clone itself, can really support these with nutrients and protect them that way when they're growing up. And so this has a big advantage from an evolutionary perspective in that regard. It also allows it to grow up, to propagate itself really quickly. So when a plant's able to clone itself like this, then it can really spread. And you do tend to see youth on age, another name for its piggyback plant, growing in these big mats, like in this photo right here. So this photo also gives a better look at some of those leaves. So this one, it's still palmate. It's not as distinctively palmate as some of the others that we've looked at earlier. You know, it's a bit more of an oblong shape, but you can still see the veins kind of radiating out from that central point at the bottom there. And then they've got these lobes. They're not too deeply sinused. They don't have the really deep gaps between the little lobes here, but they're the lobes are still there though, and then quite serrated around the edges like that. And here are the flowers. So the flowers grow up quite close to just a single stalk. This will sprout up from right in amongst the leaves in the center there. Kind of these neat little flowers like that. Looks like this crazy little mustache flower here, really cute. So what do you look for when you're trying to identify your youth on age? Look for the little fuzzy, vaguely palmate leaves that are growing up on top of the other ones, and then the single stalk with the flowers growing right close in. That is it for this group. Go on Patrick Colbert's site, quiz yourself, review these plants, come into lab for another review with whoever your TAs are. And have a good one, folks.